Okay, we're live. Hi, everyone. My name is Shana. I am the head of community for the Her app. Her is the largest app for LGBTQ plus women, trans, and non-binary folks to meet, date, go to events, do all things social. Originally on the schedule, I had a very different talk planned. And as of late, it just did not feel right for me to go on and speak about that with everything that's going on. And so I made a hard switch last night and stayed up super late. So I have notes that I have to look at because I couldn't memorize at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I wanted to switch my talk, and we are now going to talk about pride and how companies can be held accountable during this month. So let's get started. So the history of pride: Stonewall Inn, New York City, Greenwich Village, June 28th, 1969. This is a time in history that shines a similar light on what is happening today. This was the moment that Pride was born, and Pride was a riot. On this day, 8 police officers in full riot gear, not unlike what we've been seeing in the news recently, stormed the Stonewall Inn. Pressure had been mounting from previous riots, as during the time, police were specifically targeting gay bars. And during that time, you could be arrested and thrown in jail or even hospitalized for your sexual or gender identity. But tonight was a bit different because Marsha P. Johnson, a drag queen and gay liberation activist, was in the house, and she threw the first shot glass. This shot glass was known as the shot glass heard around the world, and the riots began. That shot glass was the catalyst for 6 days straight of rioting and protesting, and was one of the beginnings of the major fight for LGBTQ plus rights. Now, I say kind of the beginning, but it wasn't the first one. First one kind of began in 1920. But just like today's events, it took the fight to a new level. We wouldn't be where we are today without Black trans women, Black LGBTQ plus people, and the diverse group of LGBTQ plus community that were fighting back. So that following year, on the anniversary of the Stonewall riots, where there were multiple demonstrations in multiple major cities, we started to see gay freedom marches, Gay Freedom Day, and the promotion of the LGBTQ plus community for their needs and rights. But there's still so much work to be done. You're probably wondering why I begin with this story, especially at a community summit. Mainly because a lot of people these days see Pride as either a party or a profit, when Pride is really a consistent revolution. Companies feel that they can come in, slap a rainbow on their logo, have their ERG do what they want to do for the month, and they've done their part. For a long time, companies didn't speak up in support of Pride, and now it's seen as something that they can write a check to each year. This Pride is different. This Pride, people are not only paying attention to rights and issues happening within the LGBTQ plus community, as Pride Month started 2 days ago, but within the Black community. And it is speaking wonders to see how companies are handling being held accountable. So today, as a proud Black queer woman, we're going to have a candid talk about what you can do to support the community that you have. Because the fact is, you have Black people in your community. The fact is, you have LGBTQ plus people in your community. And the reality is, you're probably doing the bare minimum to represent them and think that February and June are the only times to do that throughout the year. This is the moment where people are paying attention, and it is our absolute responsibility as community managers to bring those communities together and provide a voice for them in this space. So today, whether you knew it or not, we are taking a commitment to the community, and we're going to do it in these 5 ways. We're going to do it through education, accountability, asking questions, taking action, and speaking up. Let's start with educating yourself. So fun facts. Did you know that it's still legal in 28 states to be fired because of your sexual orientation? 28 states. So on this map, the green, light green, whichever color, are the areas that there is no statewide law that have workplace discrimination protections. The blue states show places where they do for having your LGBTQ identity, but it may not protect for gender identity. And then there's like 2 states that have an in-between. And that's just in the US. In 68 countries worldwide, same-sex activity is illegal, and in 12 of those, you can be killed for it. Not to just look at the sad numbers. There's still financial inequality, workplace inequality, family life inequality. Like, I want you all to think about it. Like, if I have a child, I'm having a child on purpose. And that child is going to cost me about the amount that my loans cost me for college. Even more hoops if I had to jump to adopt a child. So if I'm having a kid in the future and you see me with a child that I claim as my own, be sure to be very proud of that kid, because I had to work real hard for it. But this is just an example of the different hoops that the LGBTQ plus community has to go through. Take the time, get yourself up to date on the everyday struggles of your community. Next is accountability. Hold yourself and your company accountable. Now, this does not mean find your first Black friend or your first queer friend and ask them to hold you accountable. We're tired. We are so very tired. And the last thing we want to do is have to sit and teach you and hold you accountable. We're tired of the hand holding. There are plenty of resources everywhere to lean on, especially now. People are sharing them all over Instagram and Facebook, and Google is a great platform. We need more non-Black and non-LGBTQ plus voices speaking up and showing their allyship. If your company wants to sit and wait before putting a message out there, or wants to just keep doing business as usual, you need to check them. Because that one ad that you forgot was up, or that one DM on LinkedIn for a sales pitch, and I say this truthfully because yesterday I got reached out to by a company that does community work and did a very casual, "Hi, hope you're doing okay, and this time I would love to hop on a call with you next week." And I politely but firmly had to let that person know that they needed to read their audience, check what they were doing, and know that this was not the time. And I will no longer be doing business with that company in the future. And that's how much of having a pulse on your community is very important. When you are holding yourself and others accountable, be sure that you are doing so in a way that taps into each part of your community and each part of the comms that are going out. You want to create this simple checklist that says, what scheduled post are we doing? What message are we sending in our newsletter? Can we wait to talk about that product release? Can we wait to talk about that new code that's coming out? And how do we support our people who are already volunteering for us? How are we supporting our moderators? How are we supporting our super users? Push that meeting back, take down those ads, make those quick changes, and get everyone on the same page. And the best thing that you can do is ask. Just continue to ask. Find your support, find your system. Ask your community how you can support them. And if you haven't before hearing this message, start to do that. And then make it a part of your regular schedule to check in on them. You can see here that these are some of the resources that we shared with our community within the first few days that this happened. Our CEO wrote a really thought-provoking letter to our community describing how this pride was different and the intersectionality of the Black community with the LGBTQ plus community. We've also made sure to send out different wellness resources and self-care resources, and we have switched our whole content schedule as well as the resources that we put inside of the app. We've had an in-app pop-up to resources for our community. We're holding a queer people of color activism panel that was actually, thankfully, already scheduled. But we're continuing to make sure that our events are fitting that narrative as well without losing the space for them to still naturally come together and connect. Build the structure in your company. Even as an LGBTQ plus company, we still have to have people hold us accountable for the stuff that we're doing. So from the way that our events are advertised and talked about to the type of content we're sharing, we have a leadership team that is of a bunch of different identities, a bunch of different ages, a bunch of different colors. And every time we're going and sharing a story or a narrative, we're making sure that we are checking in with them to show that we are putting out the correct message and that their story feels heard. As well, you want to make sure that your mission fits what your community is going to look at. So this list here is a list of our mission statements, and everything, thankfully and greatly, like when we planned it, it was a great thing to say this moment in time is happening now. And we have mission statements that already fit the actions we want to take. Show your community that you care. Share self practices that are accessible and easy to utilize. And after that, remember, take action. You don't need to just keep posting on social media and then not do anything else. Your community will call you on that. Making the one post and not doing anything is no longer acceptable. You need to move further to gain your community's trust and feel that they can come to this safe space. One key action that communities do like to see is that you can donate to different causes. This is a casual list that I have, but I also have much bigger ones. So if you want to hit me up after this talk and event, I am more than happy to share with you the different links and slides that we have. I give full permission to reach out to me for that. If you're working for a really big company or even one that's involved on the ground in local policies, make sure they're speaking up to local politicians and legislators, or have them come into socially distanced and virtual spaces until we actually figure out what's happening, to express what your community's concerns are. One company that I love has done this and has been doing this. Like Ben & Jerry's is one of those where it's like, oh, you're not sure that kind of what they're doing, but Ben & Jerry's has continuously done the work. And as soon as this happened, they put out a statement. They made a list of all of the things that they've stood for, how they've continued to stand for the community, and what actions they want to put forth. If your company has not done that, if you've not done that within your community to show how you're going to support them, then this would be the first place I would start. Support local LGBTQ+, POC, queer, trans, people of color businesses in any way possible. And if at any point you are questioning why you feel uncomfortable using your platform to stand up for justice within your community, and I'm talking about the community that you work in, your everyday community as well, but we're talking work here today, you should ask yourself why. And take a really good kind of thought on that. Because you shouldn't just be okay posting about the Women's March or how your company is making all of these changes with COVID-19, but then hesitate when it comes to Black Lives Matter and the LGBTQ+ experience. And that ties into speaking up. This is probably the most actionable and one that you could literally start as soon as you're done listening to this conference. Next time you're in your community, take a mental note of how many minorities are there. Take a note of how many LGBTQ+ people feel comfortable being out in your community space. And don't substitute women for visible minorities, because many companies try to pull the card of, oh, our community is diverse because we have women, but then all of those women are white. It doesn't count. It's not the same thing. Next time you see someone in the community making statements that go against supporting marginalized people, call it out, make an example, show the community that you don't tolerate it. Also, make sure you have resources available for your community to turn to. So if that's adding a new section in your community, if that is hosting talks with people that they may not typically have access to, from activists to leaders to people in tech, highlighting, amplifying different melanated voices, be sure that you're providing those resources to your community moving forward, and don't tolerate anybody's BS around it. Lots of people will try to hold the excuse that, oh yeah, well, we mentioned it. But if you're not doing the work consistently, remember, I said February and June are not the only times that you can do this. You want to implement this in your day-to-day, year-round, so that that part of your community is feeling supported. There's steps that you're going to want to take. We're not saying to do all of this all at once, because it's a lot to do. But you can take it one step at a time. So you want to sit and think, how will I start? What are the actionable steps that I can do today, by the end of the week, by next week, next month, quarter, and year long? Find the group of people who are going to hold you accountable. So whether that's your community, whether that's other staff members, whether that's your team, if you're lucky enough to have a team. I know many of us are a team of one. I am also a team of one. So I have different groups in my community that I have hold me accountable. So our moderators hold me accountable. Our power users hold me accountable. All of our community on social media holds us accountable. Our leadership team holds me accountable. I find accountability in multiple areas. Figuring out when you can implement. Obviously, right now, time is of the essence. and you want to implement sooner than later. But when you're thinking about these future plans, you want to think about when you can implement it and how does this feel? Again, this is the moment when you have to sit and think, if any part of this makes you uncomfortable, why does it? And how are you going to work through that? Because there are people who need you to advocate for them. And we are the voices as community managers to be able to speak up for the community and taking the best shot in that area. So at the end of the day, besides these 5 commitments that we've already taken, we want you to watch, read, listen, donate, and act. I have a whole list of shows and movies you can watch, books to read, podcasts and audio to listen to. I already mentioned the places to donate and the ways that you can act. People want to see what their companies are doing so that they can feel more of that connection with them. They can gain their trust and know that when they're providing their time in your community space, that it's worth it and that the community has their back. I think a lot of companies are starting to see how quickly that turnaround is becoming with not speaking up and not speaking out. And I'm also very impressed to see how many people on LinkedIn, where it's usually a very quiet, very much focused around like, here are the accomplishments of our business, are actually holding businesses accountable. I was like, change is brewing and it's very exciting. Also, you want to start with your company and start with your community, because the moment that someone asks to see a photo of your team or the top super users in your community, and there's a big lack of melanin in the moment, is the moment that you might realize things really do need to change, and change needs to happen now. So step up and speak out, because we can do social media posts all day, but posts with no actions shows complacency, and we're absolutely done with that. So overall, this starts within. These different small steps begin to make changes. And if you needed the message to say, if you needed this message to say that you can no longer stand on the sidelines and watch this play out, this is it. Thank you so much. I wanted to be sure that I did this kind of quick so that we had time to have discussions or ask any questions. So let me hop into some of the questions over here. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Kara and Aaron. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jeremy. Oh, let me see if I can find, did anybody have questions? I'm trying to find questions. Thank you, Malvika. I love your name. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Yes, the emergent strategy is where to go. That's where we want to go. Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. Kaylee, yes, I have 2 lesbian moms, and this is why I'm building my own community support. Queer families of color and our allies. Ooh, check it out, ourfamilyapp.org. Carrie, yes, start with your company, start with your community. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Isabella, I'm happy to speak to your company as well. Reveling and talk to think of question. Thanks, Jacob. Any ideas on where to start dollars to improve access and visibility? Yes. So on the ground, there are plenty of actionable companies that are actively doing stuff. I think the number one places that people are reaching out to are like regional bail funds, as well as different organizations that are doing the work. So there's like the Black Visions Collective in Minneapolis, and there's a bunch of LGBTQ ones as well that you can start putting dollars to do that. We just did a bigger donation to the ACLU, who does really great work. NCLR does amazing work. But I have lists upon lists that I can go ahead and share with you, Jeremy, after this. Kara loved you mentioning company leadership getting involved in local politics. Yes, so that was one of the things that, as we pointed out on even just with the Ben and Jerry's example, with the stuff that they mentioned they were talking about and how they support their community, they put 4 specific provisions that they were like, the government needs to look at these and we are putting our business behind this. So having them be able to look at spaces, even if it's like where your office is, and knowing what local policies are happening and having those relationships like helps, because you can even think with COVID-19 in Silicon Valley, like how much of an impact big companies need to be able to do to step into these areas. And so those are areas that people should be looking into. Raymond says, we're creating an app for grassroots activism. Loving it. Thank you, Raymond. This is awesome. How to actively involve multiple perspectives. What are some of the ways you recommend for authentically connecting with folks who are historically underrepresented in tech and data science? Giving them a seat at the table, bringing them in. The number one thing that I've done, especially with having a different like LGBTQ plus audience, is everything that we do, we always check to make sure that we have different types of representation in there. So whether that means we're hosting a panel and we have somebody who's trans, we have somebody who's a cis Black woman, then we'll have a cis white woman, but who identifies as this, and then we have like a mother and things like that. Making sure that all of those voices are in there. But that kind of goes back to the step where I was mentioning that you need to look around and see who you have, so that you can bring them to the table, because we know there's a lot of white happening in major leadership positions. And you want to be able to say, okay, if I'm looking around this room and I see more than 2 people who look like me, then I need to have other people come in, and make sure that you're having a genuinely open conversation. But I would also recommend making sure that it is a safe space and it's not going to come in with questions that are going to either like offend or just like kind of speak beneath people. I've been in talks where they stop and they're just like, well, what's the experience like for a Black woman like yourself? And I'm like, well, here's my experience. And they're like, cool, that is everybody's experience. And that's not how that works. Like, I could be on a panel with 5 other Black women and my experience could be different from each one of them. So making sure that you make it visible and available, that accessibility of coming in and talking, as well as giving opportunity for them to come in at the table and providing consistent feedback flows so that people know what's happening. One of the other things that I've noticed is that if you're putting that content into your space, people will naturally start to answer if they start to feel safe in that area. So I've made posts in our community, and I've had a lot of queer women of color and trans women of color come on and post and like mention what they think is great about it, what they think we need to do more of. And I'm taking that in and passing it along to leadership, and proof in the receipts. If you've heard me speak before, I'm always like receipts, receipts, receipts. Show your leadership what's missing and bring that in. Ben is asking, what do you do to combat the idea of that's not relevant in this community, in the contents of a technical community? Yeah. Again, have the leadership team take a look at who's there. You have Black people in your community. You have queer people in your community. And whether or not your leadership wants to believe it, they are there. Whether or not they're out in that space or not, they are actively there. So it is relevant. Do you have Black people working at your company? Then that issue is relevant. Do you have women working at your company? Then that women's issue is relevant. So they can't use that argument. And at any point, there's so much written now that you can send them a list of each time you say that that's not important, then you probably should not be in a leadership position. And you can just slide that into their email and into their DMs. Because at any point, if you have these identities in your community, then it is your issue. Thank you, Jeremy, for posting all the definitions. Have you worked with climate change orgs? Have you worked with climate change? Raymond is asking, have you worked with climate change orgs as in organizing across community groups? Would you like to see more? I would 100% like to see more, especially because everybody kind of makes like climate change seems like it's a really hipster type, again, white type thing. And it's like, no, actually climate change affects marginalized communities the most. And people who are in those marginalized communities don't get to even speak up on the issue that's happening, and people don't get to recognize it. Like you, even just thinking about the water issue in Flint, it still is happening. And that's crazy that it's still happening. But that's a big minority community. And they're just like, oh, okay, well, we'll get there eventually, but they're making it work. So that's what's happening. So yeah, that I agree. Climate change orgs need to intersect and have more conversations in different areas. So yeah, I think I'm pushing close to time. I want to be sure that the next person has time to sound check and things. If there are any other questions that you have, please be sure to message me. I'm on LinkedIn at Shana Summers, 1M in my last name. And I really appreciate you all for giving me the opportunity to change my talk, bring it to this platform, and have a candid conversation with you. Thank you so much.